Space law. Much like legislation and constitutions in the world to regulate human lifestyle on Earth, space law is a body of instructions to ensure peaceful use of outer space, and with a defined framework of agreements and principles, best manage the projects, punish the crimes, and approve the pursuits taking place out there. Space law is of great importance in governing space exploration, satellite operations, international space activities, etc. Mars Climate Orbiter Metric Fail. Mars Climate Orbiter was a robotic space probe that was launched on December 11, 1998. Other than the tasks NASA launched it for, like studying the Martian climate, atmosphere and surface changes, it was also supposed to act as a communications relay in the Mars Surveyor 98 program for Mars Polar Lander and deep space probes. The mission, however, was unsuccessful due to certain navigation error caused by a failure to translate the English units to metric, leading to loss of the said spacecraft on September 23, 1999. And it was then concluded by the engineers that the orbiter probably burned up due to entering too low into the Mars's atmosphere, therefore failed, merely cause of someone not using the right units. Buran Shuttle. Buran Shuttle was the first space plane produced as part of the Soviet Buran program, which had successfully completed an automated uncrewed mission in 1988. It was pretty much a Russian response to NASA's Space Shuttle. A part of this most expensive project in the history of Soviet space exploration has now been sitting in a building at Baikonur Cosmodrome Spaceport, since the said program was cancelled due to lack of funding around the collapse of the Soviet Union. NERVA, or Nuclear Engine for Rocket Vehicle Application, was a joint effort of NASA and Atomic Energy Commission, with the principal objective of using nuclear rocket engine systems as propulsions for the space mission application. The Nuclear Thermal Rocket Engine Development Program ran for about 2 decades, until the funding was cut in 1973. And although time and again scientists proposed the return of the nuclear-powered propulsion to explore the universe, so far the utility of nuclear fission for the required oomph remains to only exist in the curious wonderment of space devotees. Mercury 13. Mercury 13 was a group of 13 American women who were part of a privately funded program that's aim was to test and screen the participants for spaceflight. The name might remind you of Mercury 7, group of 7 astronauts finalized to fly in space for Project Mercury. And as a matter of fact, it was the person who governed the results of that Mercury 7, William Lovelace, who noticed how women just might have more of the kind of qualities that are required to be in a spacecraft in space.
Well, of course, the obvious ones are that women weigh less and require less weight, food, and oxygen, so there's a considerable weight saving. Or, taken another way, you could go up in the same booster, go up higher, or stay up a lot longer than a man could. Of course, every hour you stay in space, you learn a lot more. The other advantages the doctors and scientists tell us is women, well, from a psychological standpoint, which will become increasingly important on longer space voyages, where women can sit in confined quarters and do tedious work over a longer period of time. They require less stimulation. Men want to be up and around and doing things. And on flights, where it might be months, perhaps even 6-8 months, going out to Mars or Venus and back, if you've got a small spaceship and limited facilities, well, psychologists say women would definitely be much more able to withstand the isolation and the boredom of a flight like this than men can. Of course, men, I still say one is not better than the other. Men are physically stronger than women, and this is a very definite advantage in their favor, but I think it ought to complement each other, men and women, on certain space voyages, and there's certainly no competition between the two.
Regardless, and despite many attempts of the members and Dr. Lovelace himself, these immensely deserving ladies could not fly in space, as the documented standards already set by NASA to be qualified to become an astronaut were not quite met.
Each must be a graduate of a Navy or Air Force test pilot school, an engineering background, and 5 feet 11 or less.
So it's the qualifications of the women astronauts. I could answer number 1. Yeah, so none of us had any qualification.
We
and
were
if she was an
subjects.
engineer.
We were subjects to be tested.
They've made some statements like, well, we don't have any women in this country that are jet test pilots, and this is one of the requirements to enter our testing program. Well, this was disproved when I went through the test and passed them. I didn't have jet test pilot experience, but I still passed the same test that the male military jet test pilots had, and of course it's been totally disproved now when Russia sends Valentina up, who was a parachute jumper and a textile factory worker. That was her only background before she entered training. So like I say, there's no legitimate reasons on why the United States has not included women in their space program.
Nixon's speech.
20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour.
About 30 years after 16th July 1969, the day of the launch of Apollo 11 for NASA moon landing, we learned how NASA and US government were not absolutely certain if the first men stepping on the moon would also be able to step off it to return back home or not. And so, only 2 days before the historic event, the American author William Safire was asked to prepare a speech which is now known as Nixon's speech, because the speech was written for then US President Richard Nixon to read to the world on live television in case of a moon disaster, like Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong not being able to reunite at the command module, because then they would have to be left abandoned. Mission control would then have to close down the communication, leading to these two moon men to either starve to death or commit suicide.
At that time, the most important, most dangerous part of the moon mission was to get that lunar module back up into orbit around the moon and to join the command ship. But if they couldn't, and it was a good risk that they couldn't, then they would have to be abandoned on the moon, left to die there. And mission control would then have to use their euphemism, close down communication. And the men would have to either starve to death or commit suicide. And so we prepared for that with a speech that I wrote. And the president was ready to give that. And of course, the module made it.
These literally are Mr. Safire's own words from an interview of his. And this is that Nixon's speech.
In the event of moon disaster, fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know that there is no hope for their recovery. But they also know that there is hope for mankind in their sacrifice. These two men are laying down their lives in mankind's most noble goal, the search for truth and understanding. They will be mourned by their families and friends. They will be mourned by the nation. They will be mourned by the people of the world. They will be mourned by a Mother Earth that dared send two of her sons into the unknown. In their exploration, they stirred the people of the world to feel as one. In their sacrifice, they bind more tightly the brotherhood of man. In ancient days, men looked at the stars and saw their heroes in the constellations. In modern times, we do much the same. But our heroes are epic men of flesh and blood. Others will follow and surely find their way home. Man's search will not be denied, but these men were the first, and they will remain the foremost in our hearts. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come will know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind.
We realized what enormous risks that were being run by these astronauts. They laid their lives on the line every time. And as we look back to 30 years ago, Some will remember Chappaquiddick that weekend. But the headline of Men Walk on Moon, that will be looked at 100 or 1,000 years from now.